Hello and welcome to Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rocky, and to let you guys know, Father and I had a scheduling conflict that precluded us from being able to make a new video here today. So rather than not releasing an episode this week, we're going to rebroadcast an episode from May of 2018, which is one of our more popular episodes at the time, and it's entitled Porn and Sex Addiction. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and we will be with you here again next week. Hello and welcome to another podcast of Father and Joe. I am Joe Rocky here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, in our last podcast, we discussed essentially what you felt the biggest problems were with society. And we spent a lot of that cast talking about the marriage issue and, some ways to remedy it, when to get married, how to become virtuous. And one of the underlying themes was maturity that was causing the problems. And one of the specific problems you gave during that cast that we didn't get to spend much time upon was porn and sex addictions. And you've brought that up, and it's obviously been some time since we recorded last. And just some thoughts came to me about that, and pretty much figured it's not something that's ever really talked about, so it's probably something good to talk about. You mentioned that they make more money than all the sports leagues, so obviously it's a common thing. So therefore, I wanted to kind of bring it out because I kind of get the feeling, at least from society, that it's just me. It's just you as an individual. There's no one else really involved in it. So therefore, there's not like ran out there and just tackled some old lady crossing the street or something. I didn't physically hurt anyone else. I didn't, I did it by myself. So I think that that's one of the things that people say. So how can it really be that bad if I'm not hurting anyone? So I figured we'd start with that point and kind of go through it and see how it goes from there.
Yeah, so there are two different issues going on there. One is pornography, and then the other is uh, fornication, masturbation, so different immoral sexual expressions. Um, and in terms of pornography, I don't have any stories uploaded into my head coming into this podcast, but you can find lots of stories of the experience of women who are doing porn shoots who are really just treated horrifically. And the kind of stupid thought of, oh well, they don't have to do it. They're free. They're making a choice. They've obviously decided to do this or whatever. Who who just does that? They're desperate enough for the money that they're putting themselves into this situation. They have little enough self-respect. Why did they have so little self-respect? Well, because they were beaten by their father, because they grew up on the street, because they uh, you know, maybe in the best case, made some bad decisions and slept around in high school and then started to hate themselves for it. I mean, you find me a healthy woman with a healthy self-respect who's exploiting herself or letting herself be exploited in pornography, and I'll start to change my tune. But you're not going to find anybody like that. And so when you start to look at who are the women who are producing this, and what are the situations that they're doing that in, and what's the effect on them in being exploited in that way, and women that are doing these porn shoots that are being penetrated by 30 guys in the course, we call that gang rape,
Mm-hmm.
but when you call it art and cinema, then somehow it's okay. Just really sick stuff.
Mm-hmm.
that it's important for us to face when we're sort of sober and paying attention. Because when the chemistry of addiction, the chemistry of sexual arousal starts to set in, our minds don't really work very well. And so that's where I want to say on the other end, I'm not, there are many people, and maybe even the majority, who recognize that porn is something really disgusting and is really a plague that's harming a lot everybody who's involved in it, whether it's the movie producers or the image producers or the ones who are being exploited. Nobody is thriving because of creating pornography. I mean, this is destructive to the human person at every level.
Mm-hmm.
Now, most people who are using pornography, I would say, if they faced it, would recognize that, and they think it's sick, and nobody wants to, sort of support this. But I think there are some people that are kind of blind to that, and that don't really look at it closely. And so that's why I want to emphasize how horrific it is. And there are so many accounts now. The one that I always send people to, there's a website called The King's Men. It's a group, a male spirituality group, and I think their website is thekingsmen, one word, .us. And they have, I know they have stories of former porn, women involved in pornography, and just telling the story. If you want some graphic detail, if you want to face yourself with what you're promoting by using pornography, sometimes that does help to kind of cut through the self-indulgence and self-justification. I just say that one side. If we're not clear that this is a severe evil, well, let's face that and recognize
Mm-hmm.
that. Okay, so now let's presume that everybody at this point is recognizing this is a serious evil that we don't want to be involved in promoting and supporting by our own usage. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
now I think most people are pretty well on that page, but just to collect a few of the stragglers. Now, to look at the issue of pornography addiction, it's a serious problem because our sexual drive is so strong. There was an experiment that was done with rats that they were given a choice between pressing one button, which would stimulate orgasm, and another button, which would produce food. Food would be dropped into the cage. And most rats would starve themselves to death
Mm.
because the drive for orgasm is so strong. So we have serious chemistry that reinforces the cycle of addiction. That's just the chemical level. Tie that together with the fact that when there is a real, the reasons that people will sort of move to pornography, whether it's to medicate pain. Often that started at a young age as a coping mechanism. So where there's stress and where there's some internal conflict, pain, anger, where there's, whatever, a lot of different sort of forms of self-medication, a lot of psychological response. It also ties in with relationships, and so it becomes triggered by experiences of rejection or experiences of broken communion with a person where a relationship is struggling, because our sexuality is is so all through our experience that we can see that in the fact that every cell in our body is male for you and me, Joe,
Mm-hmm.
or female for some of our other listeners. Every cell in our body, there's no part of us that is not sexual.
Mm-hmm.
All of that has to do with sexuality. Now, the genital expression of sexuality is where we obviously start to get into some problems, but that's ultimately a consequence and expression of other dimensions of relationship and the call to self-gift and really living out of the fullness of the healthy expression of our sexuality as male or female in relationship with others. So sexual addiction as one thing, and then pornography on top of that, has such a a powerful effect on us. Now, what used to be difficult to get to because you had to buy magazines, you had to expose this to people, you had to go to some porn shop, you had to, now is so accessible on the internet. Not only so accessible, it's finding you. You don't even have to look to find it. I mean, there's
Hmm.
so many ads and whatever else that are soft porn at best or hardcore porn at worst. And then it leads you through successive layers of deeper addiction because you need to have more stimulation, raunchier stuff in order to get the same effect out of it. And then it leads you into the areas that you're paying for it, that it starts to get into more violence or children or, this kind of raunchier levels of sexual deviancy. So the whole porn industry is just so driven by an evil logic in order to ensnare. And again, there are a lot of people that are very accessible to this. The average age of exposure to pornography is age 8.
Hmm.
So the average age, which means that there are people younger than that as well as people older than that at the first exposure. And presuming some people don't ever get exposed, there's got to be something to counterbalance that. So just the huge number of people that are exposed at such an early age, when in most cases they don't have the tools to even process that. Parents are ill-equipped in some cases, in many cases, because of their own struggles. They just, bad, stop that, terrible, and then the child feels like they can't actually talk out what's drawing them to it or what it means or what, so that healthy discussion and formation that could happen in families doesn't happen. And so it is just a horrendous area that is going to take, I think, a long time to really unravel all the consequences of such highly available pornography and such widespread use of it in our society.
Yeah. On that note, just as some people might be shocked by that age thing, if you just think about it, it's essentially anywhere the internet can be. So anyone who's given a phone to their kids, your phone can connect to the internet in all probability. If you have the vast majority of those gaming units that you see kids running around with, the Nintendo one and the PlayStation one for sure, because I know it firsthand, can connect to the internet. And when I say connect to the internet, it's all of the internet, regardless of what you want. So, just as a thing to parents out there, some of them, some browsers, some of these devices have ways of doing parental controls, which is possible. Um, but just a thing out there. And then not to mention your TV. Your TV is connected to the internet as well. So just as a thought of how could it be
Absolutely.
possible for kids that young to do it, well, that's how it is. So the other thing that I wanted to bring up there is this notion that of addiction, that as a human species you need to have sex to be able to perpetuate the species. But everything else we talk about in addiction is not needed. You don't need to drink to live and produce more. You don't need to, do any drugs. But you do need to have sex, and that's part of why your body's built in to have the sex drive. So there's definitely a element out there that just discounts the entire notion that anything involving sex could be an addiction because biology requires it. So so my question is about that is that how does that work from a chemical level, or does it just make it inherently have to be stronger because your body already needs to do it?
Yeah, I mean, so when we're talking about addiction as a technical word, we can really get addicted to a whole lot of things. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, whether it's workaholism or codependency or um, so, and certainly not everybody that uses pornography, and even people who use pornography regularly, whatever, who who have in some cases even daily or multiple times a week that they're falling into it, are not necessarily addicted per se.
Mm-hmm.
again, to use the technical expression, because addiction is really trying to fill a deeper, the simple description that you're trying to fill an infinite hole with a finite thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you're never going to do it, and there's a deeper thing that's going on there. But even for people who aren't sort of addicted in the more extreme sense of that word, the real regular use, I mean, there's so many people who would like to never use pornography again and who have been using pornography on a regular basis, weekly, a couple times a week, maybe a little bit less, monthly, for years, for decades. Uh, and I hear confessions of much older people, 60, 70 years old, who are still falling and feel just very embarrassed about that. But so it has a powerful attraction, and then when we form patterns, and that's what we're talking about for most people's pornography use, is not so much addiction as again, in the technical sense of that, as a pattern, as a habit that has formed, and then there are certain triggers that push someone into that thought pattern, and then that unfolds with, whether it's late at night or whether it's home alone or whether it's after a lot of work, whether it's a pattern of self-reward. There are a lot of different triggers that stimulate a habit or a pattern in people that leads to masturbation or pornography and masturbation. And so, but the chemistry, as I was saying, is very strong, and presumably for the reasons that you're identifying. I mean, it's part of the perpetuation of the species, as much as God's design also works together with a sort of evolutionarily sound model of, that there are certain instincts which are part of survival and things like that. That's all very true. As somebody committed to celibacy, I can tell you that it's not necessary to have orgasm, and it's not necessary to view pornography. So these are not things that are instincts or drives that cannot be overcome. The virtue of chastity is a real thing, and it can be developed, and people can have sexual freedom. Now, again, depending on how damaged people are, how deeply ingrained the pattern is, maybe it's going to be a matter of reducing more than totally eliminating. But in any event, we should not give into a defeatist mentality that we're just doomed to masturbation or pornography when the wife is not available, or for people who are single or celibate. That's just a lie, and that's a real reductionist view of the human person. So we need to have a clear sense of the ideal and the freedom, and we need to have be disturbed that we would ever admit a kind of bondage. I mean, I think there is nothing more selfish than masturbation. It's just so profoundly selfish. There's no gift for anybody else in that. It's just entirely self-focused. And I don't say that to condemn people that are struggling, but in case we've allowed a mentality that says, oh, it's not that bad, it's just, releasing stress, or it's just, self-pleasure. Yeah, it's just completely selfish. And sometimes I like to say, do you think Jesus masturbated? And hopefully that draws forth an image that's so disturbing that we think, oh gosh, no. And insofar as we are really called to be like him, and he wants to give us the grace to do that, then we need to have a higher view of what we're called to, and the real majesty of the human person.
Okay, well let's turn down that road, and you mentioned before that you can learn how to be chaste and how to develop those skills. So why don't we pursue that angle here and try to turn how to correct some situations.
There are a lot of different factors that go into it. as I said, there's a simply chemical factor. There's a sort of habitual dimension that it's certain, what when people are in certain situations that it kind of triggers the thought. There's a psychological dimension that when certain bad things happen, that can push people toward that turning in on themselves. That can be rooted in uh, various issues. There's a there are relational dimensions that when people are being cut off from relationships, when there's isolation, that has an impact. Um, so to peel apart some of those things, in terms of pornography, I will often encourage people to put some blocks on their computer. Uh, just inserting some decision point that you run up against a wall can sometimes help a person to be shaken to their senses and cut off the train that's starting to move out of the station. So putting some blocks on the computer is a starting point, but then and one of the systems is called Covenant Eyes, and they will block the internet site, but they also have a way of notifying you have some accountability partners, and so somebody else is going to be notified, and that develops a relationship because the the isolation is a major cause of some of the uh, sexual problems. So fostering that relationship that somebody is notified that you are starting to look at pornography and then they reach out to you and then you have a conversation about it, that helps to bring it into the light, which is really important. Like mold and a lot of other nasty things, pornography and sexual struggles tend to really thrive in the darkness, and the shame becomes very intense, and then we cover up the shame by hiding it, and then the shame itself, the buried shame, brings forth more pornography problems to try and medicate the pain that's there, which of course doesn't work. Um, so bringing it out into the light is very helpful. Having accountability, not just with Covenant Eyes when there's a mistake, but getting involved in a men's group, for example, or knowing, if you have some good guy friends that you can connect with and say, hey, I'm struggling with this problem and I need to be able to talk about it. And talking to your wife is often not a good idea. A lot of women are extremely sensitive to this and consider it an act of infidelity, which it is in a certain sense, although it's tied in with much different things than adultery is. But a woman often also feels like, am I not enough? Am I not satisfying my husband? Am I doing something wrong? And will turn into a lot of self-blame. And then she's also a little bit disgusted. Now, pornography is becoming a larger and larger problem among women as well. And so I don't want to make it sound like no woman ever struggles with this, because that creates another shame that causes women to isolate, which I don't want to do. But in any event, having somebody to be accountable to and to talk with about it, it may be worth getting some spiritual direction or some psychological counseling to look at some of the roots of it. Sometimes that initial experience that started to form the pattern at age 8 or 9 was connected with things like, well, that's what my big brother did, and I had the idea that that had to do with masculinity, or there was someone whose father came to him at age 13 and dropped a pile of Playboys and said, now it's time to learn to be a man. He cursed his son in doing that. He defined masculinity this way. He distorted the image of fatherhood by being the one to provide this, and he initiated him in this terrible pattern. But that's going to have a deep impact and have deep roots because of all of those things, the fatherhood, the masculinity part, and then the years of habitual behavior that was reinforcing all of that. And then when he comes, to me at age 25, he's been doing this for half of his life, and it was rooted in that experience. But sometimes getting into some of those initial experiences, some of the initial shaming, around it, some of the ways it was hidden in the darkness, some of the more perverted elements. A lot of times, in darker moments, what starts as soft porn in a few dark moments turns into more hardcore porn or more perverted behaviors, and then that deepens the shame and buries it even more. People start to question because they started to wander in the area of same-sex pornography. Am I gay now? And now I have to cover up my sexual identity. And no, you're not gay. You're just flooded with chemistry and making bad decisions in an effort to have a bigger orgasm. It's like, anyway. So just a lot of things to peel apart, and having some people to work that through with is a really big help. A 12-step program, SA, Sexaholics Anonymous, or SLA, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. Those 12-step groups will help people meet others who struggle in similar ways. And then I think a lot of the wisdom in 12-step programs, to be aware of your triggers, the kind of self-awareness of what's happening inside of you, the self-thoughts, the self-hatred, a lot of that stuff. There's tremendous wisdom there. I really encourage 12-step programs for people. It's a little bit embarrassing to get started with sometimes, but then so quickly the communion that's found there, like, wow, people really get me, and they really struggle in the same way, and they're really willing to help me. Having an accountability partner from a 12-step program who's available 24/7. You're struggling at 3 a.m., you call your accountability partner, and he's going to be ready to walk with you and help you to avoid the sin. So those are a few starting points. Again, there's also a book, there's a website, a ministry called Integrity Restored, and I think that's the website, integrityrestored.com or .org. And Dr. Peter Kloponis is probably the foremost expert. He's a psychologist and is a very devout Catholic. And in the Catholic world, I think he's probably the leader of all of this, of treatment. And he has a book out called Integrity Restored, and he sees kind of a 7-pronged approach to handling. There isn't just sort of like, if I could just put blocks on my computer, everything will be solved. Or, if I just get an accountability partner, everything will be solved. There's just so many different interlinking dimensions of this that it really becomes, and this is the positive side, if I can switch over to that, when we start to move down this path, it becomes a whole integrated process of healing and growing. Not only does the virtue of chastity develop, but all of the other virtues develop too, in fortitude and temperance and being able to persevere, being able to make good decisions, in a lot of communication. Anyway, tremendous things can grow out of this. Oh, and how did I leave out? I mean, the importance of prayer through all of this should be fairly obvious too, that we need to make sure that our prayer life and our relationship with God is in a good place to be able to overcome that. That's going to involve sacramental confession, regular personal prayer, and when we really take seriously the battle to overcome a struggle with sexual sin, it's really a pathway to holiness. It is a Marine basic training obstacle course that can really develop a person into a saint if you take it on as a real focused battle. So that's the positive side. It's not just a matter of managing a problem, but it's really a positive path to a real growth in holiness.
Well, it's good that we ended, on a positive note there, So this obviously being a very common issue out there, and giving a positive direction in which to go there. We went a little long on today's podcast than most of them, but nonetheless, we thank you guys all for listening. We hope that you guys will follow us on Twitter at FatherAndJoe, and please retweet our cast, and please continue to give us the reviews you have on whichever site you're subscribing for it. It really, really does help grow our cast, coming up higher in searches, and for really just clicking a couple stars and writing a word or two. It makes a big difference for us to be able to get to more and more people. So we thank you guys very much for that. We hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next week.